Molt bon dia. Good morning. Welcome. Let's introduce the next panel. And this one we have made in partnership with Amplifon, which is a company that develops hearing technologies. They are also here at Sónar+D at the Sónar Innovation Challenge, which is an activity where companies provide technology and groups of creators solve a technologic challenge. And they are working on prototypes to better listen and to be aware that our hearing can be fragile and we can lose it. But the thing is that we are in an era that listening has technologically, and also creatively, more possibilities than ever. There is virtual reality, there is binaural sound, there is 3D sound. There are many ways in which we can listen. We can listen through the body with haptic devices. There are all kinds of things that we can do to hearing, and we wonder what's the future of listening. So for that, we thought, why don't we invite people that have a great set of ears or that know a lot about hearing and about listening in ways that is not just the ears, but further. So we have here Stefano Papetti. He is a researcher at the Zurich University, and his research is about haptics and music. Then Mr. Roger Lin, he develops and designs music instruments. He designed the MPC a while ago, and now he does the expressive instrument Linstrument, which is kind of a cool name. Then Claire Tolan, she's a technologist, a developer, and ASMR artist. Do you know what ASMR is? If you don't, she will tell you. And moderating, the one and only Peter Kern. Please welcome them.
Maybe more than one of me now, actually. I'm one of a couple of models. Hopefully, you'll find out which clone you got today. So, I mean, part of what has always excited me about discussions of technology is that the deeper that you get into technology, the deeper you have to go into self-investigation and sort of understanding of what it means to be human. So what I wanted to talk to all of you about today was about that, about how we can kind of take each of your individual disciplines and figure out how they relate to listening. For any of you who were here yesterday, we were fortunate to hear from Susan Rogers. I think probably a lot of people showed up expecting to hear stories about Prince, and Susan tells wonderful stories about Prince, but she took us a little deeper into the brain and her research into actually what lights up in the brain when people are creative, and what was going on inside of the nervous system of Prince when he was at work. So I want to kind of take that this morning, and it's also great that everybody looks kind of fresh and not hungover, which is why I love that there's no Sonar by night on Thursdays. But I'd really like to kind of get into that question of we sort of started with creativity and thought yesterday, so to talk a little bit about how listening and perception figures into what each of you are doing, and not only through what we hear through the ears, but other sensations as well. Maybe let's just to start with Stefano. Can you tell us a little bit about what's haptics?
Haptics is basically the science of making sense of touch and the kinesthetic sense. So communicates through touch and the kinesthetic sense. So everything that is conveyed through the body, like proprioception, and the muscles, joints, and of course the skin, which is the largest organ we have. Well, apparently.
No, definitely, right? The skin is our largest organ.
Yeah, I don't know. Now, recently there was this big claim that they found. I don't know the English name for that. It's this kind of water. Intersection, something like that, between the skin and the other parts of the body, who's basically.
Okay, so like the gooey, wet stuff beneath the skin is actually
exactly, and somebody told this is this is the largest organ. And well, anyway.
Okay.
And yeah, so haptics is pay attention to the body, basically.
Well, so what's your connection to that field, Ben? You've just come from this conference of people coming at this from lots of different disciplines, right?
Yeah, so my background is in computer science. I'm a computer engineer, and during my master's thesis and then PhD, I was developing models of acoustical phenomenon, like everyday phenomenon, not really musical or speech sound, but mostly things that we usually don't pay attention to, like the sound of scraping or rubbing or impacts that happen all around us. So, and trying to make sense of those of this information to also to interact with computers. So since we make sense of the world through these sounds, and we are not even aware of that, the idea behind this research, not really my idea. I just joined this research field, and was to make sense of. So you rely on those sounds to interact with computers in a very transparent way. So the idea was to have the computer disappear, basically, and so the machines might communicate through those everyday sounds instead of synthesized. Well, they are still synthesized, but not iconic kind of sounds. Not like beeps or buzzes, things like that. And after that, while developing those models, I was also experiment a little bit, reusing those models not only to convey auditory feedback, but also to render vibrotactile feedback. And basically, those models output vibration, and you can either use this vibration to drive a loudspeaker, or to drive some kind of actuators, and those actuators vibrate. And yeah, that's my connection to haptics. That is how it started. And then I started not only to developing things, but also trying to evaluate what is the role of touch in interaction with the world, and also in interaction with the musical devices, musical instruments. What it means for a musician to have a continuous tactile interaction, haptic interaction with their instruments. So that's one of my recurring question.
Well, and I guess what's significant about that to our topic today, right, is that if people are getting this sensation through their skin, this changes how they hear. This is connected to how they hear what they're doing, right?
Yeah, there are many studies right now. So it's not. I mean, sound is really the auditory manifestation of vibration, basically.
Right.
So it's really the let's say non-tactile side of vibration, and so there's a very clear physical connection between the two phenomena, so to say. So the same source, but
when you say non-tactile, that means that you just mean that we're not experiencing sound just through the organ of our skin, or it's happening in the inner ear, or?
Well, we perceive sound through the body, not only through the ears. This is quite clear. I mean, there are even bone conduction headphones. So, and they basically skip the outer ear. And but the thing is, hearing and listening is really a very complex phenomenon. So my research is really all about trying to focus on both channels, so auditory and haptic channels, and yeah, to see what are the interactions. So, for instance, one might notice that if listening to a very low frequency sound, we might perceive vibration stronger, or the opposite. If there's some strong vibration, we might perceive a louder low frequency sound, while it's not physically there, but our brain integrates information in such a way that we. So there are a lot of cross-modal interferences, and those are super interesting to me. So listening is really also multi-channel and multimodal in a way.
Well, so that's the perfect segue to the medium that you're working with, Claire, right?
Yeah.
So explain to us a little bit of what's ASMR and what's actually happening when we have this cross-modal hearing, physical sensation experience.
So ASMR is an acronym. It stands for Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, which sounds like a very scientific name, but actually it was like christened this in a Yahoo forum in like 2008. And given this name by a woman who works in cybersecurity, weirdly, in order to make it sound more scientific. But basically what ASMR is it's a tingling sensation in the scalp and the spine in response to very soft sounds, things like whispering, nail tapping, hair brushing, and on and on and on. And some people, not everyone, experience a variety of different tingling sensations in these areas. Why this exactly happens, we don't know yet. It's very difficult to study scientifically, in part because it's so idiosyncratic. You know, some people get it, some don't. Some people have it very strongly, some people don't have it so strongly. And also because the tools that we would use to study this, like MRI machines and other kind of brain measuring devices, are kind of the opposite of the sounds that trigger them. So they're very loud or they're very invasive. And ASMR kind of by nature is something that you have to be in the right state of mind to experience. So you have to be kind of relaxed and focused. And so scientifically, yeah, it's quite difficult. But yeah, there's ASMR currently finds its like biggest audience on YouTube, where there are over 7 million videos at this point, I believe, that are designed to trigger the sensation in a variety of ways. Most interesting for my work has been the kind of relaxation and anxiety, insomnia relief that's provided by ASMR. These videos are used therapeutically in addition to triggering the tingles because they're so monotone, or not monotone, but monotonous. That's the word I'm looking for. So, yeah.
Does anybody in the audience experience this ASMR or watch these? Okay.
Cool.
How many people knew who that was, or knew what that was, ASMR? Oh, okay.
That's also kind of the magic of YouTube, right? It's
Yeah,
like
exactly.
even the notion of this existence has spread faster because of the internet.
And I think the videos are really like seductive in a way, and this is also why it spreads. They're very strange scenes in which these sounds are delivered, and the visual elements of the videos just match so well to the sounds. So yeah, they become viral in a way because of this. Yeah.
And why video? So sorry to interrupt. I mean, I was thinking maybe a SoundCloud playlist would work even better than
so
that.
the sounds are primarily recorded binaurally, so if you do that, then most of my work has been with sound and not with video because I'm more interested in the sounds. But I think the videos like add an additional element. You know, if I'm like stroking a towel and then you see the towel in the video, this somehow allows you to make a connection that's not always there if you're just listening to sound. So it's a really interesting question though, because I think people experience, or some people report they experience the sounds more strong, or the tingles more strongly when they're linked to a visual element. So there's, what that interplay is very interesting. Yeah.
So there's maybe a direct link between synesthesia and...
Exactly. Some researchers think that ASMR is a form of synesthesia, but this is not yet proven. They've done studies where they do brain scans on people who experience ASMR versus people who don't experience ASMR, and like just resting brain scans, and there's some indication that brains are functioning slightly differently in ASMR experiencers, but this is maybe not totally scientifically like codified yet. So
Right.
yeah.
So synesthesia, we're talking about the experience of one sense kind of being triggering another sense, which could be the most common examples, musicians like musicians hearing like Scriabin, hearing sort of music as color or associating sounds with colors. But there are also other weirder examples, sometimes involving smell or I don't know if
like spatial. Like sometimes you experience like characters in like spatial relation to each other, which yeah, it's really interesting.
Do the rest of our panel, do you think of colors or physical sensation? Do you find that music or sound triggers color associations, spatial associations? Do you get goosebumps?
Well, I can remember times when I heard some music that I very much liked that I got chills up my spine.
Right.
Yeah.
Kind of like watching a horror movie. Sort of, but I think that's something different, isn't it? That's something that's more common, and everybody's got that one.
Yeah.
So.
We'll have to test. I don't have an ASMR test for us today. But so how do you work with it as an artist then?
Yeah, so I started working with ASMR in 2013 on a radio show, primarily because I was interested in what happened to the sounds when you took away the video element of them. And it's branched into performances. I'm really interested in kind of making experiential spaces that an audience comes into to interact with these sounds, particularly in settings that you wouldn't necessarily like think to encounter them, like clubs and stuff like this. And a lot of ASMR's videos, one like subgenre is role-playing videos, where the ASMR artist, this is what we call ASMR video makers, ASMR artists, leads the viewer on through a role-play scenario. So like an accountant, a fairy princess, an abducting alien, these kind of things. So at present, I'm making a kind of ASMR soundtracked role-playing game to further think about this role-playing trope, because I think it's really interesting how it interacts with the sounds. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
I don't have a good segue from fairy princesses to Roger, but the two of you are kind of come from computer science background. Roger, it strikes me that kind of in terms of it's easy to just say that you're the creator of the MPC, but that part of the sort of ongoing thread in the work that you've done in instrument design has been in pushing the industry to work differently with that physical interface. And it's also safe to, I think maybe more significant to say than you created the MPC is that you I don't actually know what to call this, but that you created the mechanism in the Lindrum and the MPC, which really transformed how we relate to digital instruments, right? So what was the beginning of that development?
Does anybody know what the MPC is? Okay.
Or does anyone not know what the MPC is?
Yeah, it's a drum machine. I'm basically largely responsible for removing all the humanness from music by making drum machines. But I've always been interested in better human interfaces to music, so that the music that an artist listens to in his head, imagines, can be better realized. And so in the early 80s, which is when I made my first drum machines, that was beats. It was drum beats. And it was something that a lot of people have identified with as a mode of musical expression. And so I tried to get as much capture of human gestures in there as possible, which was limited at the time. And then right now I make a new thing called Instrument, which if you went to at 4:30 today up in the networking bar or somewhere around here, I think it's over there, I'm going to do a demo of this instrument. And what it basically does is it captures 3 dimensions of finger movement polyphonically. So you can get a lot of the expression that you get from, say, a violin or a guitar or a saxophone on an electronic instrument, because I feel that as nice as and creative as some of the DJ music is, it's basically being made with on-off switches. And there's only so much musical expression you can do with on-off switches, and as a result, I found that there are no more instrumental solos in popular music. And there are actually almost no solo artists in electronic music. It's basically background music. I always feel like it's this entire musical genre of EDM is sort of like a big intro waiting for the middle of the song and a centralized voice, you know. And so I'm trying to help bring that back and a few others like that. So that's what I'm doing. What was the question?
Well, actually, if you say you're trying to bring that back, it sounds like we're all going to make music like the Doors again, or have like really long instrumental solos in the middle of our tracks.
Yeah.
But, so you're going to ruin music a second time.
There
No,
you go.
no, I was kind of interested. I mean, so like when you were nice enough to invite me over to your house, I remember that this was pre-Linstrument, right?
Yeah.
And I remember that you had stacks of silicone samples, right? So I mean, and this is something that you see if you look at other industrial processes. So maybe what people are unaware of in the process of designing something like the Linstrument is how important stuff like that is.
Yeah.
How do you go about something like deciding what the touch of this instrument is, and how important is that to the way that people have responded to different things that you built?
Well, it is important. There are practical reasons, like if you want to perform the equivalent of a pitch slide on a violin on an electronic instrument, your finger must slide smoothly, but it also must not slide too smoothly, or you can't hold it in place as you would against the wood of a violin neck. But the other thing, too, is there's certain things that we touch and feel, and we say this is quality, and there's certain things we say are not quality. Someone who's very good about this is Roland Lamb, who makes the product competitor to me, the Seaboard, because he's an industrial designer from the Royal College of Art Design School, and he thinks a lot about just the touch of different silicones or metals or things like that. And so actually I've learned a lot from him in that regard. But yeah, it is important. Whenever I create an instrument, what I start from is I figured the ideal situation is you just have a big plug in the back of your neck, like a RS-232 port, and you just plug into it, and the music you're imagining just comes out of the speakers, and everything else is an impediment. So I try to reduce the impediments as much as I can. That said, we're sort of in an era of confusion now where all this MIDI stuff is confusing people, and it's very hard to get around it, but it's going to get better.
What will make MIDI better, or what makes you say that?
It just takes a while for everybody to agree on things, and so that you never have to think about those technical things, and God forbid people can actually focus on music and not just technical skills. Right now, there's a tremendous focus on technical things, and I think it's kind of like what I've read about the early days of the automobile. There were carburetor clubs and tire clubs and spark plug clubs and transmission clubs. And then when cars became reliable, all those clubs went away.
Right.
And because no one had a reason for them anymore.
Actually, but maybe that's a good metaphor, right? So a lot of times, and even partly in the discussion with Susan yesterday, there's a tendency to kind of separate the engineers from the musicians. But thinking back to kind of early days of what I don't know nothing about early race car history, but based on the vague things that I understand about early race car history, the drivers who were kind of the leading drivers were also all mechanics, right? They were intimate enough to understand the technology of what they were driving around, which could also kill them. I mean, part of what makes me optimistic about the direction of MIDI is that some of the people working on that seem to be very good and very empathic musicians as well as good engineers. Is that? Yeah. I mean, is that a fair description of you too and the people that you're working with?
Wait, I'm sorry, not quite getting it.
It strikes me that at least the people working on this sort of, we're talking about the future of MIDI, which is the means by which Rogers and other people's instruments communicate with each other and with computers. Yeah. At least some of the people working on that seem to be pretty deep into both the music side and the engineering side, right?
Yeah.
So would that be a fair description of your background too? I mean, you've had to empathize a lot with different musicians over the years.
Well, yeah, I sort of have one foot in the music world and one in the nerd world, and so I combine them in what I think is the most effective way. But ultimately, I think one of the problems a lot of instrument designers make of electronic instruments is that they forget that the people they're making instruments for aren't engineers. They don't have their technical skill. And so I try my best to make instruments where I can hide all those details and make them as simple as possible. But there's only so much you can hide them, because the nature of connecting things via MIDI means you have to learn these protocols and connectors and wires and things. So it's going to be confusing no matter what. You're lost no matter what you do.
Well, back to this idea of removing impediments, I guess kind of a question for everybody. I've spent the last few weeks listening to Native Instruments, has been bringing in lots of guests to talk about accessibility. And so part of the theme has been really thinking about the music-making process holistically in terms of all sorts of different sensations, and then figuring out what obstacles can you remove to people making music, including if they have different physical abilities. We're gradually developing different hearing abilities, namely less. For any of you, is the work that you do kind of made you think differently about the sort of physical relationship that you have to music when you're listening?
Well, first, what you said reminded me of my recent. I just found that there's a club in Switzerland, where I'm based in Switzerland, and of hearing impaired, and they travel around Switzerland to attend concerts, and they really enjoy a lot being at a concert. And also, they have special videos, for instance, like rappers, especially tailored to the hearing impaired. And I don't know, sometimes I think we just think music is not for the hearing impaired, but it is not. Actually, it's a much richer and a complex phenomena. And so it's not just that if you cannot hear, you won't be able to appreciate or enjoy music. So
no, that makes tons of sense, right? If we go out, hopefully tonight, and we're all dancing around a little bit this afternoon in the sun. This is a different experience of music. That's part of why I like coming to Sónar. Living in Berlin, as sun and music are not so associated for me. Well, how are people responding when you're kind of doing these performances, right?
Well, I would also say that kind of linked into this, I think a lot of the interest in ASMR or first memories of ASMR come from like very fundamental childhood experiences, you know, things like having your hair snipped or having your mother like stroking your back or something like this. And I think then that's made me think about how music affects me in this kind of like primal way as well, you know, and like the comfort that can be found there, and how that comfort is attractive as an adult, especially whenever we're in this, you know, like very confusing and often distressing world. So I would say that, and I think that that's, from my experiences with audiences, it's this kind of intimacy that can just be formed really by something so simple as a whisper. That's been, just why the performances that I have done have, you know, had some resonance with the people who attend, and just like shifting this social space of a performance by the sounds, like the sound quality that you use, has been one of my like primary explorations, I guess. So, yeah.
So this is like music, and people describe this as being touched, like physically, having the feeling of being touched by music, or
definitely
like getting a hug from the music or something.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Or like, and I mean, even more than a hug, getting comfort or calming from the music, and from strangers who you've like never encountered before and will never encounter again. You know, this kind of bond that can be formed really quickly just by signaling in this soft, slow way. Yeah.
And I mean, this seems to relate to what you've done over the years too, Roger, both from we can understand the MPC as destroying music by removing humans. But I think maybe part of the reason those of us in computer music don't think of it that way is we can also think of it as bringing more kind of humanity and physical contact into this sort of otherwise limitless, very abstract digital world, right?
Well, it depends how you look at it. You know, I think all of us in different segments of our society are finding ways to integrate computers into our lives. You know, we have microwave ovens that have that heat food faster, and they time it for you, and you've got phones that do things for you, and even have a little bit of smarts. And in music, you know, we're trying to do that too. We're trying to ask how do we integrate this technology into the music. But usually what happens, what computers do is they offload from the human the tasks that could be easily defined and repeated. And in music, that has created loops. Because loops are something you can define a loop and you can just repeat it forever. So the musician no longer has to play things over and over again. He can just push a button and something that has been created, often by someone other than himself, can just loop around. And it gives the musician the ability to create an entertaining piece of entertainment and with less work than before. And I think that's, since the topic is the future of listening, one of the things I wrote about in one of the emails is that the future of listening, in a sense, is creating. In the following sense, if you think of sort of a continuum, a line, on one end is listener, someone who listens to music. They buy music or they stream music and they listen to it. On the other end is someone who plays the violin or the saxophone or its modern equivalent. So you could say this person is much more the creator, this person is more the listener. But it used to be a big switch, and now it's just kind of a continuum. You can be a little bit this side of listener. If, for example, are a DJ and you take loops that are created by someone else and you arrange them in a uniquely creative way. So you're listener, but you're a little bit creator. And then it sort of invites you on this upward path of virtuosity. And at some point, for example, you say, I'd like to find out what those things called notes are and scales and melodies. And then you can learn about that and be more the creator. Whereas in past, you had to start off learning those scales and notes, or else the teacher would hit you on the hand with a hammer or something like that. So it's, in a sense, then the future of listening is creating. And I think it's not only a great opportunity for people to participate in the music creation process, but it allows people to choose however they want to play on that. You know. Actually, a couple of thoughts, too, came up. The first one I thought when I heard that the title of this panel was The Future of Listening, was that the future of listening is hearing aids. Because if you go out there on the floor, there's probably about 50,000 watts of power pumping at any particular point. And I am living evidence of what happens, because I have hearing aids now, of what happens when you damage your ears when you're younger. I was a rock and roll guitar player, and I had a Marshall stack next to me when I tour. And so this ear has a little bit less trouble than this ear, for example. But for that reason, I thought it was kind of funny that the company sponsoring this event is a hearing aid company. So the future of listening definitely is hearing loss. So mind your sound levels when you're in front of those speakers. One more thing that came to mind about the future of listening is not listening. In the following sense, where I'm from in the United States, we have an idiot for a president right now who seems to listen to no one but himself. And it seems to be a trend that's happening in parts of the world. And I certainly hope it does not continue. And I think the ability to actively listen to people and form consensuses is a very powerful thing. That's all I'll say about that.
Yeah. Well, to flip that around to Americans that I find more inspiring than the president. I mean, I think what's wonderful about what Alfred was doing in the session before us, and what Pauline Oliveros was contributed was the idea that kind of all of the stuff that we do starts with listening. It's sort of a beautiful starting point for music making, right? Yeah.
Music making and self-discovery as well, I think, and empathy and all of these things. Yeah.
Well, speaking of listening, let's listen to some questions from you all. We have, sure.
Check, check. Hello. Thank you. Right, this was a bit of a slow burner question, so it might be a bit long. So Roger, you talked about kind of a matrix-style plug in the back of your neck, and that anything maybe between that or between the music maker and the music could be just an impediment to music making. And it had me thinking that maybe kind of the tension between our minds and bodies in music making is part of what makes music and music making so exciting. As opposed to that just being an impediment. But is that kind of an idea that any of you would accommodate or would like to respond to?
In other words, it's sort of good to have limitations?
Yeah, or that the tension, the struggle between what is inside your mind and what's possible with your body is kind of part of what makes listening to music or an expression of music so exciting. Or is that something you would agree with?
Well, I'm very practical. I try to remove impediments whenever possible. But then there's also this feel-good thing that happens. There are a lot of things that, I'm not sure if this is directly addressing the issue, but there are a lot of things going on with music that I think are just goofy, like the Euro rack phenomenon. This is taking synthesizer modules and connecting them together with patch cords and things. And I did this when I was a teenager, and I loved it because there was no alternative. But whenever I'd find something that sounds good, I would just not touch it for 2 weeks because I know I could never create it again. And then they created these new synthesizers that had presets, and I thought, that's great. I can just get it back. I can save it. So I have no interest in Eurorack stuff. But then again, I had no interest in vinyl when it came back either. And I thought, but it seems it's kind of funny. I think that there are certain things that are warm and fuzzy, and they're not necessarily practical, but we feel good about them. And they turn that feel-good knob up, and so we do them. And that's completely legitimate. If something makes you feel good, that's great. And I just tend to be, being a person with German heritage, I tend to be very practical. You know.
Thank you.
There's a question over here. You're right.
Hi, very interesting talk. I have a question for Stefano, and it's how to address the uncanny valley of haptics. I don't know if you are aware of this.
Sorry, D?
Uncanny valley of haptics.
Oh, the uncanny. What is the? How do you
Uncanny
do
valley.
Uncanny
Yeah.
valley.
It was
of
first
haptics.
described for robotics, but recently described for haptics too. And how to address this.
Well, actually, my approach is a bottom-up. I try to understand what are the perceptual mechanisms behind haptics, perception, and then my idea is that once we understand more, then we can solve this issue, and it's not really a bottom-up approach like super laboratory-based approach, but I'm a big fan of the ecological approach to cognitive sciences. So instead of studying sound or vision in a laboratory setting where you just put flashes or beeps, things like that, I much prefer to be in a real environment where you have real sounds, ecological sounds, or real visuals, and maybe real haptic cues, and that might help in filling the gap between what is currently rendered by machines and what is what we expect or we would like to have as haptic feedback. But there are a lot of technological issues right now with the haptics because, I mean, there has been a lot of development for visuals, of course. We are very much based on vision, so our society. And there has been a lot of research on sound lately, so a lot of sound technology. And there's a lot of research on haptic technology right now, but still, I mean, there was a big shift recently. Haptics used to mean mostly robotics and force feedback, things like that. But those things are heavy, bulky, not really practical. So a lot of the industry, really super recently, in the last 3 or 4 years, they shifted a lot from robotics to vibrotactile devices. And even with vibration, you might be able to convey some more full round haptic sensation, and it needs a lot of research. But
Does everybody know what the uncanny valley concept is? Okay, so it basically means that as you simulate reality, the closer you get people think it's more like reality, and then right before it gets perfect, it starts to look creepy or feel creepy. And the example they give is animated characters, rendered characters of humans in movies, for example. They start to look better and better, and you think, oh, that's very, very nice, it's close. And when they get really close, it just seems like this weird thing that stares out into space and is no longer human. And so that's what that is.
I mean, this is part of what happened with drum machines, right? Is they basically, people started to like them more when they got less realistic. And still, sometimes people like them to kind of sound like something, a different entity. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
instruments
that's probably true.
too,
If you really try to simulate a great human drummer, like a Buddy Rich or a Jack DeJohnette or something like that, a musician would be able to tell as they get very close to say, oh, that's kind of like a cheap copy of a real drummer.
A keyboard never said anything as mean about your products as it sounded like marching ants, right? Like they said about the 808. But yeah.
That's probably accurate.
I don't know. I've never heard marching ants. Let's take one more question somewhere. Other questions?
Oh, there.
Yeah? I can't.
So, very interesting talk. Thank you very much. So this question is related to it's to Claire, related to the ASMR. When you were, and we have been lately into investigating a bit more. How it goes. We have the feeling that ASMR is kind of, if you were able to hear those kind of sounds, it's kind of superpower. I'm interested, maybe it's a question that you cannot answer, and also Roger said that the future of listening is about hearing aids. I'm interested if the hearing aid not as something that covers an impairment, but something that can eventually in the future be something that can improve, like a superpower of hearing. Like you have a teleobjective and you can see very far, or binoculars. What do you think about the future with these possibilities?
Well, but I've got a hearing device here that lets me hear people all over the world. So I'd say that's pretty good. Or I can talk to people all over the world. So you'd think this is, in a sense, this is kind of like a hearing enhancement or a speaking enhancement.
Well, so Claire?
Yeah. So for me, I would say, this concept of something in my ears that extends my hearing is interesting, but what's more interesting to me about ASMR is how it extends my perception of the world. So every time I find an object, I think about the ASMR sound that I could make with it, and so everything, just like mundane water bottles gain like a secondary function, and that to me is the real superpower of ASMR, because it starts to just like break apart your perception of the world around you, and turn everything into a tool for soothing or for tingles. So, yeah.
It's interesting that it seems like the way that all of you are characterizing this, usually we would get the future of talks. It seemed like, at least a few years ago at events like this, that would involve some kind of technological solution, which is not, we're all technologists, so we're not anti-technology, but it seems each of you is kind of focused as well on the body and the brain and perception, right? Is that?
Yeah, definitely. I think technology can extend these things in certain ways, but I'm interested in fundamental human experiences, just in, I guess, yeah. Yeah, that's all. Yeah.
Are there things that would augment that in terms of what you've worked with? And are there things that could kind of maybe develop this response? Is it about changing the source material or changing the listening device, or a combination?
Yeah, well, binaural recording definitely helps you to really experience ASMR, and so I guess in that way, well-developed headphones as well. But yeah, so I would say that, but in terms of making somebody who doesn't already experience ASMR, I haven't seen any technology that would do this. And in fact, the more you experience ASMR, the less you experience ASMR, if that makes sense. So the more attention you give these sounds, the less they have their full effects over time. This is something that commonly happens to a lot of people. So yeah, I think it's quite an ethereal thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you. All three of you have given me new ways of thinking about listening. And after Susan leading to you, it's clear that somebody in the biomedical industry needs to give us whisper quiet MRI, non-invasive MRI, and other brain sensing.
Oh yeah, that would help too, I guess.
Yeah. So thank you all, and see you all.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Peter.